guys, tonight we're going to begin a story that drifts between the struggles of everyday life and the quiet wisdom of an old teacher. Imagine yourself lying back in bed. Maybe your pillow feels just right, but your mind still refuses to rest. That's exactly how our main character felt. His name was Sabal, and life seemed to weigh on him so heavily that even breathing felt like too much effort. If you've ever felt like life was piling on and you couldn't take another step, well, let's just say you wouldn't survive in this story either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, leave a comment with your city and what time it is where you're watching. I love seeing these stories stretch across time zones, from late-night listeners in New York to early risers in California, or someone halfway across the world catching this while sipping tea. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sabal was a young man living in a crowded town, but inside, he felt completely alone. Day after day, he compared himself to his friends who seemed to be moving forward, while he sat idle, stuck in place. His parents scolded him, relatives teased him, and friends laughed behind his back. Each time he heard their voices, his chest grew heavier. When neighbors asked, "What are you doing with your life?" he had no answer. Slowly, he withdrew. First from gatherings, then from relatives, then from everyone. His world shrank until it was just him, four walls, and the echo of his own doubts. He would sit awake at night, blaming God, blaming fate, even blaming himself. Life, to him, felt like a burden he hadn't asked to carry. Sometimes he wondered, wouldn't it be easier not to live at all? His mind was restless, chasing questions that circled endlessly without answers. One afternoon, as he wandered aimlessly down a narrow street, he noticed a crowd gathering. At the center stood a guru, a teacher, speaking softly yet clearly about suffering. Curious, Sabal slipped into the back of the crowd and listened. The guru's words flowed like water. Suffering is a teacher. It shows us the truth of life. You can learn to live from it, or you can hide away and weep. The people around nodded. Some smiled faintly, as if comforted. But Sabal's heart burned with resistance. He muttered under his breath, then finally stood and spoke. Suffering doesn't teach, it only hurts. It feels endless, like nothing will ever change. Even death seems smaller compared to the weight of this pain. The crowd turned. Silence hung for a moment. The guru looked at him calmly and asked, "Tell me, child, what is your suffering?" So Sabal poured out his story, his failures, his shame, the weight of expectations, the mockery of friends, the loneliness at home. When he finished, he asked desperately, "Can you remove this pain from me?" The guru smiled gently. "Come back to me," he said, "when true suffering arrives in your life. Then I will give you the answer you seek." And with that, the guru turned and walked away. The words stung Sabal like a sharp wind. What does he mean? This isn't real suffering. If this isn't pain, then what is? He felt dismissed, unseen, like even a wise man couldn't understand him, but something stirred inside. Maybe it was pride, maybe anger, maybe the spark of determination, but Sabal decided that from that day, he would do something, anything. He could no longer sit idle while life passed him by. And so the first seeds of effort began to take root. Meeting the guru, Sabal's restless nights turned into weary days. He walked the streets of his small town with no clear purpose. His shoulders slouched, his gaze fixed on the ground. The chatter of shopkeepers, the laughter of children, even the sound of neighbors calling out to one another. It all passed him by like a language he no longer understood. Inside, he carried a weight that no one else could see. One afternoon, while wandering down an alley, Sabal noticed something unusual. A crowd had gathered near the steps of an old stone building. People were sitting cross-legged on the ground, their faces tilted upward, calm and attentive. At the center stood a man in simple robes, an elderly guru whose voice carried like a steady river. The guru spoke slowly, pausing as though each word needed room to breathe. Suffering is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Through suffering, life shows us its truths. You may choose to learn, or you may choose to turn away. But the lesson remains. Sabal felt the words press against him like someone had just leaned on a bruise. People around him nodded, their eyes shining with relief. A mother pressed her child's hand gently, as if the guru's words had just soothed her heart. Sabal, though, felt irritation rise in his chest. He thought, how can anyone say this pain is a teacher? It's only punishment, it's endless, it's crushing. Before he realized it, Sabal was on his feet. His voice cracked the silence. Suffering doesn't teach. It only hurts. It never ends. Compared to this pain, death feels like mercy. Gasps whispered through the crowd. Some stared, others looked away, uncomfortable with his raw honesty. The guru's eyes, however, did not waver. He regarded Sabal the way a mountain regards the wind still, unshaken. Tell me, the guru said gently, what is your suffering? The words unlocked something in Sabal. He spilled out his story. The sting of failure, the shame of having nothing to show, the voices of his parents and neighbors telling him he was worthless, the laughter of friends who moved forward while he stood still. He spoke until his throat grew tight, until there was nothing left but a plea. Can you take this pain away from me? The guru paused, then smiled softly. Return to me, child. When true suffering finds you, then I will give you what you seek. And just like that, the teacher turned and walked away, his robe brushing against the dust. The crowd dispersed, murmuring, but Sabal stood frozen. The words echoed in his head. Return when true suffering finds you. True suffering, he muttered. What could be truer than this? Does he not understand? Am I invisible even to wisdom itself? His fists clenched, and for a moment he felt anger toward the guru, toward life itself. But beneath the anger, a flicker of something else sparked. Perhaps insult, perhaps challenge. For the first time in months, Sabal felt a surge of determination. If his pain wasn't enough to be called true suffering, then he would change his life. He would not stay idle. He would act, try, build something, become someone. Maybe then the guru would see. Maybe then the world would have to notice. That night, Sabal lay awake, but the weight on his chest had shifted. It wasn't only despair anymore, it was also fire. He whispered to himself, almost as a vow, tomorrow, I begin. The stars outside blinked faintly as if listening. The town slept, unaware that one restless young man had just chosen to step out of his despair and into the chaos of trying. And with that decision, the first seeds of effort began to grow. Seeds that would soon lead him into both triumph and danger. First seeds of effort, the morning after that vow, Sabal awoke before the sun. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the faint glow spilling through the cracks in the shutters. His body felt heavy, but his mind carried a spark that hadn't been there before. He had promised himself he would begin, and even if he didn't know where to start, he knew he couldn't let another day pass wasted. He walked through the town's marketplace, his eyes scanning the stalls as if they were suddenly alive with possibility. Merchants called out about their goods, children darted between stands, and the smell of spices drifted on the air. For years, Sabal had wandered this same path, feeling invisible, unnoticed. Today, though, the streets felt different, like a board, waiting for him to make his first move. He paused at a fruit stall where the vendor struggled to keep up with customers. The vendor's hands trembled slightly as he weighed mangoes, counted coins, and shouted prices all at once. Sabal watched, then without thinking, stepped forward. "Do you need help?" he asked. The man glanced up, surprised, then nodded quickly. And just like that, Sabal found himself stacking fruit, wrapping bundles, and making change. By evening, his clothes were sticky with juice and his feet ached, but the vendor pressed a few coins into his hand. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "I could use another pair of hands." That night, Sabal lay awake again, but this time it wasn't despair that kept him from sleep. It was the strange satisfaction of having done something, anything. He turned the coins over in his palm, small and ordinary, but to him they were proof. He wasn't useless. Days turned into weeks. Sabal worked wherever he could, sometimes at the fruit stall, sometimes carrying sacks of grain for the mill, sometimes sweeping floors. The jobs were small, the pay was smaller, but each task became a stone in the foundation he was building. His parents noticed first. Instead of scolding him, they greeted him with cautious relief. Neighbors began to nod politely when they saw him. Even his own reflection seemed different, less defeated, more alive. But Sabal wanted more. He wanted something that was his, something he could point to and say, "This is mine. I made this happen." With the few coins he saved, he bought a small wooden cart. He painted it with rough strokes of blue and yellow, not caring that the colors bled unevenly. To him, it was beautiful because it was a beginning. He filled it with fresh fruit from the market and pushed it through the streets. His voice trembled at first as he called out, "Fresh fruit, sweet fruit." But children came running with small coins, and mothers smiled as they chose pieces for their families. The first day, he barely made enough to cover his costs. The second day was no better. But on the third day, an old woman pressed a coin into his hand and said, "You remind me of my son when he was your age. Keep going." The words warmed him more than the sun overhead. Weeks passed, and the cart began to attract more attention. He learned which streets were busiest, which corners caught the afternoon shade, which houses had children who begged their parents for fruit. He experimented with different arrangements, stacking apples in a pyramid, lining bananas in neat rows, offering small slices to taste. Slowly, the cart became more than a cart. It became a symbol of movement, of possibility. His parents smiled when he came home, his mother even humming softly as she cooked dinner. His father, once stern, patted his shoulder and said, "At least you are trying." Those words, though simple, carried more weight than any gold. Sabal carried them like a medal, but there were still nights when doubt crept in. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, he wondered, "Is this enough? Will this small cart ever make me more than just another man selling fruit?" He remembered the Guru's words, "Return when true suffering comes." Sabal frowned in the dark. If only he could see me now. Would he still dismiss my pain? Would he say this effort means nothing? The question swirled, but each morning he rose and pushed the cart again. He learned to smile at customers, to greet children by name, to listen when neighbors spoke of their days. And in these small exchanges, he began to feel a thread tying him back into the fabric of life. If you're listening right now and you've ever felt stuck, caught in the same loop of doubt, maybe take this moment to reflect. What's the smallest step you could take tomorrow? Drop your thought in the comments. Sometimes the tiniest seed planted today grows into something you couldn't imagine years later. As the months rolled by, Sabal's cart earned him just enough to dream bigger. He saved each coin carefully, resisting the urge to spend on frivolous things. His friends noticed the change. Some teased him, fruit seller really, but others admired his persistence. For the first time, Sabal could smile at both praise and mockery, knowing that at least he was no longer invisible. Yet the hunger inside him was not fully satisfied. Success, even a small taste of it, is addictive. Sabal felt it in his veins like fire. He wanted more. He wanted to prove himself not only to his parents and neighbors, but to the world, and perhaps most of all to the guru who had dismissed his earlier pain. This quiet yearning was about to grow louder, leading Sabal down paths he could never have imagined. What began as a humble cart of fruit would soon set the stage for ambition, temptation, and choices that would change the course of his life. Small success. Morning light spilled into the marketplace, painting the stalls in gold. Sabal pushed his cart down the street with steady arms. The wood creaked, the wheels squeaked, but the rhythm felt almost musical now. He was no longer the invisible young man hiding in shame. He was the fruit seller with the painted cart, and people knew his face. Mothers waved when they saw him coming, children tugged at their parents' sleeves to buy apples, and neighbors greeted him by name. At first, the coins he earned barely covered his costs. But slowly, the balance shifted. He learned to bargain with farmers for fresher produce, to avoid streets where buyers were few, to smile just enough that customers lingered, but not so much that he seemed desperate. Small adjustments stacked up, and his earnings grew. One evening, Sabal counted his coins carefully by candlelight. For the first time, there was more than he expected. He stared at the small pile, his heart thumping with pride. He wasn't just surviving, he was moving forward. The next morning, his father noticed the light in his eyes. His mother hummed softly as she prepared breakfast. The air in the house felt lighter, as though the weight of disappointment had lifted, replaced by cautious pride. The town, too, seemed to notice. People began to speak of Sabal, not as the boy who did nothing, but as the young man who worked hard, who tried. The fruit cart became a fixture of the streets, its painted sides chipped in places but recognizable, almost iconic. Sabal took quiet pride in that. He had carved out a place for himself, however small. But with success came hunger. He began to dream bigger. One day, a neighbor leaned on his cart and said, "You're doing well." Imagine if you had a second cart, maybe even a small shop. You could hire boys to help you. People would respect you even more. The word struck Sabal like a spark in dry grass. That night, lying awake, he pictured rows of carts, a shop buzzing with customers, his name whispered as a man of means. The dreams grew brighter than sleep itself. The next week, Sabal used his savings to expand his goods. He added baskets of spices, jars of honey, bundles of herbs. The cart grew heavier, but so did his profits. He began to feel the intoxicating pull of ambition. Each coin was no longer just proof of effort. It was a promise of what else could be. If you've ever chased a goal and felt that surge of satisfaction when you see progress, you know how addictive it can be. Success, even a little, makes you hungry for more. If you've felt that in your own life, type, "I know that feeling" in the comments. You'll find you're not alone. Months passed, and Sabal's reputation grew. His parents no longer worried. His neighbors spoke kindly of him. Even his old friends, who once mocked him, treated him with a mix of surprise and respect. He was still young, but he had proven something to them, and more importantly, to himself. Yet beneath the pride, a quiet unease stirred. Late at night, when he counted his coins, he sometimes wondered, "Is this really enough, or is there something more I should be reaching for?" The memory of the guru returned like a shadow, his calm smile, his quiet words. "Come back when true suffering finds you." Sabal frowned. He wanted the guru to see him now, to acknowledge his progress. He wanted the world to know he was no longer the boy who had nothing. One evening, as the sun set in crimson streaks, Sabal sat by his cart, the coins warm in his hand. The sound of children playing drifted on the air, mixed with the calls of merchants closing their stalls. He should have felt peace. Instead, his chest tightened with a restless craving. Success had given him pride, but it had also unlocked desire. He didn't just want to survive or even be respected. He wanted more. And that craving, quiet at first, would soon become a storm. Because the path of ambition rarely stops where you think it will. It keeps pulling you forward, tempting you with bigger dreams, faster gains, and riskier choices. Sabal's small success was only the beginning. The next chapter of his journey would lead him into the dangerous fire of ambition, where the line between growth and greed blurs. And once he crossed that line, his life would never be the same. Ambition sparks. The days grew longer, and with each passing week, Sabal's cart felt less like a humble beginning and more like a launch pad. He was no longer simply moving fruit from hand to hand. He was building something. People noticed. Customers returned, asking for him by name. His parents, once ashamed, now looked at him with quiet pride, and yet, as the world began to recognize his effort, Sabal's mind filled with a different kind of hunger. It started innocently. One evening, as Sabal counted his coins by lamplight, a friend leaned over and said, "You've done well. But why stop here? Think bigger. Imagine being the wealthiest man in this town. Imagine your name spreading across the state. Even kings would want your friendship." The words echoed in Sabal's chest long after his friend left. He lay awake picturing carriages lined with his goods, caravans bearing his name, doors opening wherever he went. The cart outside his window suddenly looked too small. From then on, his mind shifted. Selling fruit was no longer enough. He needed more products, more customers, more recognition. He poured his profits into expansion, honey jars, spiced nuts, bundles of herbs, fabrics from distant towns. All found their way onto his cart. The more he offered, the more coins clinked into his pouch. He began to taste the sweetness of ambition, and it was intoxicating. At first, ambition felt like energy, like wings lifting him higher. He stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, and dreamed with greater fire. People around him saw the change. Friends admired him, and strangers whispered about his success. His family marveled at how quickly he was growing. But ambition has a way of turning fire into fever. What once felt like light now burned hotter, faster, consuming his thoughts day and night. He began borrowing money to expand more quickly. The first loan felt risky but thrilling. When it paid off, he borrowed again. Soon his cart became 2 carts, then 3. Apprentices worked under his watchful eye. He moved faster than his rivals, always reaching for the next gain. But with every step forward, his sleep grew thinner, his mind more restless. At night, instead of resting, he paced the floor, whispering plans, calculating profits, imagining a future where his name was carved into the walls of history. If you've ever felt that rush of chasing something bigger, that restless pull to keep climbing higher, you know how addictive it is. Ambition can feel like oxygen, but if you've ever burned out chasing too much, too fast, let me know in the comments. Your story might resonate with someone else who needs to hear they're not alone. Sabal's friends cheered him on. "You're on your way to greatness," they said. "Why stop now? You're closer to power than you think." Their words fanned the flames, pushing him further. Yet he did not see how the fire also ate away at his peace. Meals were swallowed quickly, conversations cut short, nights surrendered to worry. He still smiled in public, but alone he carried the weight of his choices. The more he gained, the less satisfied he became. A day of profit brought relief for a moment, then a new craving. More customers, more expansion, more control. He began to cut corners, mixing lower quality goods with the better ones, convincing himself no one would notice. He whispered threats to rivals, plotted against competitors. In his rush to rise, he stepped over the very values that had first lifted him. The town saw his growth, but they also noticed the change in his eyes. The warmth of the fruit seller had hardened into calculation. His smile had become thinner, his voice sharper. He was winning, but he was also losing something unseen. One night, exhausted but unable to sleep, Sabal sat with his head in his hands. The coins scattered on the table no longer looked like treasure. They looked like chains. He remembered the guru, his calm voice, his piercing eyes. Return when true suffering finds you. At the time, Sabal had thought it an insult, but now, staring at his restless reflection, he wondered if he was beginning to understand. Still, ambition would not let him stop. He told himself he was too close to greatness, that only one more push, one more deal, one more risk would finally give him the peace he craved. What he could not see was that peace does not grow in the soil of endless hunger. It slips away the more you chase it. And so Sabal continued, each step deeper into the fire, not realizing he was walking toward a storm that would strip everything from him. The downward turn. The fire of ambition had carried Sabal high, but flames never burn without smoke. His carts multiplied, his business stretched across the market, and yet his nights grew longer, darker. Every coin he earned seemed to vanish into the next loan, the next scheme, the next restless plan. At first, it was exhilarating, but slowly, the cracks began to show. It started with whispers. A few customers noticed that the honey didn't taste quite as pure, that the spices were weaker, that the fruit wasn't always fresh. Rivals muttered about shady dealings, about intimidation behind closed doors. Some merchants avoided him quietly, their eyes sliding away when he passed. Sabal brushed it off. He told himself everyone envies the man who rises too quickly. But deep down, the doubts gnawed at him. He borrowed more money, faster than he could repay. His friends urged him on, saying, "This is how success works. You spend today to earn tomorrow." Their encouragement felt like fuel, and so he ignored the growing weight of debt pressing against his chest. He convinced himself it was temporary. Soon the profits would outpace the loans. Soon he would be untouchable. But soon never came. One evening, Sabal sat at his table, coins scattered before him. He added them, counted again, but the numbers never worked. No matter how he arranged them, the debts loomed larger than the earnings. His hands trembled as he realized the truth. He was sinking. That night, he did not sleep. He paced the floor, muttering plans that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Outside, the moon watched silently, while Sabal's heart raced with fear. The very ambition that once gave him wings now felt like chains dragging him down. If you've ever reached a point where your own dreams began to suffocate you, you'll understand Sabal's panic. Ambition can be a blessing, but unchecked, it can consume. If you've had a moment where you realized you were chasing too hard, too far, share it in the comments. Someone listening tonight may need your reminder. The next weeks were brutal. Debtors came knocking, their voices no longer friendly. Rivals he had threatened returned the favor, cutting him out of deals. Customers drifted away, whispering about dishonesty. His apprentices quit one by one, leaving him to push the heavy carts alone. The once bright chatter of the market seemed to quiet whenever he walked by. The man who had burned so brightly now cast a shadow. Sabal's family saw the change, his mother's face lined with worry, his father's silence heavy with disappointment. The pride they once felt now turned into concern. Neighbors who used to greet him avoided his eyes. Friends who had cheered his rise now demanded repayment. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by sharp words and cold stares. The walls closed in. Sabal's home felt smaller, darker. His mind refused him a rest, replaying every mistake, every wrong turn. He remembered the guru's face, the calm voice, the promise, "Return when true suffering finds you." He clenched his fists. Was this it? Was this the suffering he had been warned of? One night, as rain pounded on the roof, Sabal sat alone with nothing but silence and fear. The sound of coins no longer filled his room, only the hollow echo of loss. He stared at his hands, once busy with building, now trembling with despair. The fire of ambition had left him with ashes, yet even as the storm of failure raged, something in him whispered to seek again, to return to the place where this journey had begun, to stand once more before the guru and demand answers. But he wasn't ready, not yet. The fall had only begun, and he still clung to the hope of recovery, the illusion that one last effort might save him. He would learn, painfully, that sometimes the fall must run its full course before the ground can teach its lesson. And Sabal's ground was still waiting. Return to the guru. The storm inside Sabal grew louder than the noise of the marketplace. Each day he dragged himself through the motions of trade, but the fire was gone. His carts stood half empty, his customers scarce. The debts he carried pressed on his chest like stones. Nights offered no relief. He lay awake, staring into the dark, his mind racing in circles. His bed felt like a battlefield, the silence a cruel echo. He longed for rest, but rest would not come. One morning, exhausted beyond measure, Sabal wandered away from the market. His feet carried him through winding streets, past familiar doors, past fields, until he found himself standing before a quiet grove. There, in the distance, he saw the familiar structure, the guru's place. The same steps, the same worn wood, the same stillness. For a moment, Sabal hesitated. His pride flared, reminding him of the last time, when the guru had smiled and dismissed his pain. But despair is heavier than pride. Sabal climbed the steps and entered. Inside, the guru sat in silence, his eyes half closed, his hands resting gently in his lap. Sabal fell to his knees, his words tumbled out, raw and desperate. He spoke of sleepless nights, of debts piling higher than mountains, of friends turning into enemies, of the restless fire of ambition that had left only ashes. His voice cracked as he admitted, "I cannot find peace. Not in my work, not in my home, not even in my own mind. I thought success would give me rest, but it has stolen every breath from me. Please, Master, tell me how to end this suffering." The guru opened his eyes and studied him for a long moment. Then softly he asked, "And what have you learned from this pain?" Sabal froze. He had come for answers, for solutions, not questions, but the silence pressed him to speak. Slowly he whispered, "I have learned that chasing wealth and power brings no peace. That friends who cheer your rise may abandon you in your fall. That dishonest gain tastes sweet for a moment, but turns bitter quickly. I have learned that even when you hold everything, your heart can feel empty." The guru's smile returned, quiet and knowing. "Then this too is not true suffering. True suffering has not yet touched you. Return to me when it does, and then I will give you what you seek." Sabal's chest tightened. Again, the same words. Again, the refusal. He wanted to shout, to demand, to shake the old man until answers spilled out. But something in the guru's calm face silenced him. Frustrated and weary, Sabal bowed his head. The guru gestured toward the grove. "Take this," he said, handing Sabal a heavy jar filled with gold coins. "Bury it beneath the tree. When the time comes, it will be waiting for you." Confused but obedient, Sabal carried the jar into the grove. He dug with his bare hands until the soil caked his nails and covered his arms. He lowered the jar into the earth, covered it again, and sat for a moment, breathing hard. When he returned, the guru was gone, leaving only silence in his place. Sabal walked home with mixed feelings, resentment, curiosity, a flicker of hope. He told himself he had wasted his time, that the guru had played with his pain. And yet, The image of the buried jar lingered in his mind. If you've ever gone to someone for advice and left feeling more confused than before, you know the frustration that burned in Sabal's chest. Sometimes the answers we want aren't the answers we need. If you've had a moment like that, share it in the comments. It might remind someone else that confusion is often the first step toward clarity. The days that followed were no easier. His debts pressed harder. His rivals grew bolder. His peace grew smaller. But beneath the chaos, Sabal carried a strange certainty. Somewhere in the grove, beneath the roots of a tree, a jar of gold waited. And perhaps so did the answer he longed for. The ground beneath him was shifting, though he did not yet see it. The next turn of his journey would test not only his ambition, but his very survival. The hidden jar. The memory of the jar stayed with Sabal like a secret rhythm beating in the background of his life. He went about his days trying to salvage what was left of his business, but in quiet moments his thoughts drifted back to the grove. He could still feel the weight of the jar in his hands, the cool touch of the coins, the way the earth had swallowed it whole. It was more than gold. It was a mystery. And mysteries have a way of keeping restless minds awake. In the weeks that followed, Sabal's fortunes wavered. Some days he managed to turn a small profit. Others left him staring at empty baskets and impatient creditors. Yet despite the turbulence, he held on to the image of that jar like a safety net. If everything collapsed, he told himself, he would return to the grove, dig it up, and start again. That thought gave him just enough strength to keep pushing forward. The idea of hidden treasure began to change him. His walk carried a subtle confidence, as though he knew something others did not. When rivals mocked him, he smiled faintly. When friends demanded repayment, he stalled with an air of patience. Deep inside, he clung to the certainty that the guru had left him a path out. But doubt whispered too. Why had the guru given him the gold only to bury it? Why not allow him to use it immediately, to save himself from ruin? The contradiction gnawed at him. Some nights, Sabal dreamed of digging the jar up, running his fingers through the coins, feeling them slip between his hands like water. He woke with sweat on his brow, torn between desire and restraint. If you've ever been haunted by the thought of something just out of reach, something you know could change everything, you understand Sabal's torment. It's the pull of almost, the ache of not yet. If you've felt that, take a second to share in the comments. It may remind someone listening that they're not the only one caught between patience and temptation. Eventually, the inevitable came. His debts grew too heavy, his reputation too fragile. Creditors pressed harder, and the pressure became unbearable. With nowhere else to turn, Sabal walked back to the grove. The air felt different this time, thicker, quieter, as though the trees themselves were watching. He knelt by the tree, dug into the soil, and unearthed the jar. When the lid came loose, the glint of coins shimmered in the fading light. Relief rushed through him. He lifted the jar, felt the weight against his chest, and whispered, "I am not finished. Not yet." He carried it home like a man carrying his future. With the gold, he paid off enough debts to keep his creditors at bay. He reinvested in his trade, buying better goods, repairing his carts, and spreading word of his return. For a while, the tide turned. Customers trickled back, drawn by the freshness of his goods and the energy in his voice. His family, once anxious, began to breathe again. It felt as if the buried jar had resurrected him, but gold, like ambition, does not solve restlessness, it only feeds it. The more Sabal gained, the more he wanted. He told himself the jar was proof that destiny favored him, that the guru, in his wisdom, had chosen him for greatness. With each coin spent, his hunger grew sharper, his pace quicker. Success returned, but with it came the same old unease. His nights remained sleepless, his heart restless, his mind haunted by the feeling that no matter how much he held, it would never be enough. And in that restless hunger, the seeds of downfall were sown again. He could not yet see it, but the same fire that had once carried him upward was already beginning to consume him once more. False triumph. For a time, Sabal walked with his head high again. The coins from the hidden jar had saved him, given him room to breathe, and for a moment he believed he had conquered his troubles. His carts rolled once more through the market, his goods gleamed in the sunlight, and people began whispering that the fruit seller had returned stronger than ever. To those who saw him, it looked like a victory. To Sabal, it felt like redemption. He told himself that this time would be different. He promised he would be wiser, more careful, more honest. But ambition has a way of disguising itself as wisdom. Within weeks, the old fire returned, pushing him harder, faster, louder. He expanded quickly, convinced the jar had not only given him gold, but a kind of blessing. Every coin he earned was proof that destiny favored him. Friends who had drifted away during his fall now returned, their voices full of praise. "You've done it, Sabal," they said. "You're unstoppable. Why stop here? You should be the richest man in the city, the kind of man even rulers come to for favors." Their words flattered him, feeding his pride. He wanted to believe them. He wanted to believe that his suffering had been nothing more than a test, and that now he had earned greatness. But beneath the applause, cracks spread. To grow faster, Sabal borrowed again. To increase profit, he cut corners again. He mixed cheaper spices with the fine ones, watered down the honey, hid bruised fruit beneath the fresh. He told himself it was temporary, just until he was fully secure. Customers returned, coins filled his purse, but so did whispers. People noticed the change. Some shrugged it off, others frowned and walked away. At night, when the market was quiet, Sabal counted his coins by candlelight. The pile grew larger, but instead of comfort, it brought unease. He remembered the feel of the buried jar in his hands, how solid it had seemed. These coins, though plentiful, felt like sand slipping through his fingers. His mind raced with questions. What if the guru meant for me to use the jar only once? What if there is no more safety left for me? The truth pressed heavier each day. Rivals grew bolder, some plotting to undercut his prices, others whispering to customers about his dishonesty. Creditors circled again, not yet demanding, but waiting like wolves for a stumble. And his so-called friends, the ones who praised him loudly in public, began quietly hinting about loans. At first, small amounts, then larger, always with the same smile. "Of course you'll pay us back quickly. A man like you can't lose if you've ever been praised by people who only wanted something from you. You know the hollow taste that praise carries. It feels sweet on the tongue, but bitter in the stomach. If that's ever happened to you, share a line in the comments. Someone listening tonight might need to see they're not the only one who's been used by fair-weather friends." Sabal felt the shift, but refused to admit it. He clung to the illusion of triumph, to the image of himself as a man rising beyond failure. He told himself that if he pushed harder, earned more, moved faster, the doubts would vanish. But the faster he ran, the more tangled the net became. His nights filled with racing thoughts, his days with forced smiles. The victory he had craved tasted hollow. One evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops, Sabal sat alone at his table. Before him lay a heap of coins, shining in the fading light. For a moment, they looked like a crown. Then the light shifted, and they looked like shackles. He pressed his hands to his face, realizing that what everyone else saw as triumph was, to him, a prison. The jar had given him gold, but it had also given him a mirror. And in that reflection, he saw not a man at peace, but a man enslaved by his own hunger. The illusion of victory was cracking. The The storm that had been gathering on the horizon was now moving closer, ready to strip away everything he thought he had rebuilt. And Sabal's greatest fall was yet to come. On the edge, the market no longer felt like a place of promise. For Sabal, it had become a battlefield where every smile hid suspicion and every handshake carried a hidden blade. The carts that once filled him with pride now looked like burdens chained to his name. Each wheel that turned was powered by debt. Every coin that dropped into his palm seemed already promised to someone else. The applause had faded, replaced by demands. His so-called friends were no longer cheering. They were knocking on his door, their voices sharp, their smiles gone. By day, Sabal plastered on a confident face. He stood tall, called out his goods, pushed through the motions, but inside, his heart hammered with fear. At night, the mask slipped. Alone in his home, he paced until his legs ached. The coins on his table mocked him with their smallness, their insufficiency. No matter how many he gathered, it was never enough. The debts outweighed them, the threats outnumbered them, the fear overshadowed them. Sleep abandoned him. Hours stretched into endless nights, each thought heavier than the last. He lay staring at the ceiling, hearing the whispers of his creditors, the laughter of rivals, the disappointment of his family. His body was exhausted, but his mind was a storm. He longed for silence, but silence never came. One evening, as the sun melted into darkness, Sabal found himself standing on the edge of the town, staring at the hills beyond. The world around him blurred, but one thought rang clear: there is no way out. His heart clenched as he realized he had come to believe that life itself was the cage. He thought of ending it, of stepping into the darkness and leaving the storm behind. The idea frightened him, but it also tempted him. For a man drowning, even the thought of sinking can feel like relief. If you've ever stood at the edge of despair, you know how heavy that silence feels. It presses against your chest, whispering lies that there's no path forward. And if you've ever found your way back from that place, leave a word of encouragement in the comments. Someone listening tonight may need that light. But as Sabal stared into the night, a memory surfaced, the calm face of the guru, the words spoken so long ago: return when true suffering finds you. His knees weakened as he realized, perhaps this was the moment. Perhaps this storm, this suffocating despair, was the true suffering the guru had spoken of. With trembling steps, he turned back toward the grove. The journey felt endless. His body ached, his mind screamed, but his heart carried him forward. By the time he reached the guru's place, the night was deep and still. He fell at the master's feet, his voice breaking as he poured out everything: the debts, the betrayals, the sleepless nights, the thoughts of ending his life. Tears streaked his face as he whispered, "I cannot carry this anymore. If this is not true suffering, then I do not know what is. Please, Master, give me peace." The guru listened quietly, his expression soft, his silence steady. At last, he asked, "And what have you learned from this pain?" Sabal choked on his answer but forced the words out. "I have learned that wealth is fragile, that friends are fair weather, that ambition consumes more than it gives. I have learned that even when surrounded by people, you can feel utterly alone. I have learned that a man can lose everything and still keep his restless heart." The guru closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, clear as the moonlight. "Then, listen closely. This too is not the final suffering. There is still more for you to see. When that day comes, and when you are ready, return once more." Sabal's tears fell harder. The words felt like rejection, yet in the master's calm tone there was no cruelty, only patience, only certainty. The old man's eyes carried a depth Sabal could not yet grasp. Exhausted, Sabal lowered his head. He wanted to argue, to plead, but no words came. The silence of the grove held him instead, and so, with a heart heavy but strangely steadied, he rose and left. He walked back into the darkness, unsure of what awaited him, but carrying the faintest glimmer of hope that perhaps the journey was not over. The edge of despair had not been his end. It had only been another turn in the path. Yet the road ahead promised trials even greater than before. Lessons of loyalty. The days after Sabal's visit to the Guru felt like walking through smoke. He returned to the market, but every step seemed heavier. The coins he earned slipped away to creditors. The smiles of customers faded, and the so-called friends who once toasted his success now stood in his doorway demanding repayment. Their voices, once filled with praise, now carried threats. Some spoke softly, reminding him of promises. Others shouted in the street, calling him a liar. A few even leaned close, whispering dark warnings that chilled his blood. Sabal had thought friends would stand by him, that laughter shared in good times meant loyalty in bad. But when the weight of debt pressed down, they scattered like leaves in the wind. Those who had borrowed his generosity now pressed hardest for their return. Those who had raised cups in his honor now pointed fingers, mocking his fall. In their eyes, he was no longer the promising merchant, but a burden, a man to be avoided, a name to be forgotten. He returned home one evening to find his family waiting. His father's face was grim, his mother's eyes swollen from tears. They had listened to neighbors, to relatives, to whispers that traveled faster than truth. They counted his failures aloud, every wrong step, every dishonest choice, every debt unpaid. The words cut deeper than any creditor's threat. Sabal sat in silence, feeling the walls of his own home turn cold around him. At night, when he lay awake, he thought of loyalty. What did it mean? He remembered the old woman who once pressed a coin into his hand and told him to keep going. He remembered apprentices who had carried his goods before leaving quietly when things grew dark. He thought of his parents' pride that had blossomed briefly before withering again. Loyalty, he realized, was not measured in words spoken during feasts or in hands that clapped when success glittered. Loyalty was what remained when the glitter faded. If you've ever been let down by people you trusted, you know the sting Sabal felt. And if you've ever had one person stay by your side when everyone else walked away, you know how priceless that is. Take a moment to share in the comments. Who has stood by you in hard times? Your story might remind someone tonight that true loyalty still exists. Sabal's debts deepened. His rivals struck deals behind his back. His once bustling carts stood still, the paint fading, the wood creaking. He tried to salvage what he could, but each effort collapsed beneath the weight of mistrust. He looked for help, but doors closed. He searched for kindness, but eyes turned away. One evening, desperate, he approached a man he had once called his closest friend. He asked for time, for patience, for a little grace. The friend looked at him coolly and said, "You were eager to rise above us. Now, fall alone." The words slammed into Sabal like a stone. He walked away, his body trembling, his mind hollow. By the time he reached his house, he understood loyalty is rare, he is. Most people celebrate your light, but will not stand with you in your dark. Those who do are treasures greater than gold, and those who betray you are teachers too, though their lessons are sharp. The realization did not erase his pain, but it carved something new into him, a kind of clarity. He saw that he had been blind, trusting the wrong voices, leaning on hollow friendships. If he was to rise again, he would need to anchor himself not in applause, but in truth. But clarity does not immediately change circumstance. His debts still loomed, his reputation still crumbled, his nights still stretched into restless dawns. The storm had not yet passed. In fact, the winds were gathering, preparing to push him even further from the life he once dreamed of. And soon, Sabal would learn that betrayal was not the end of his suffering, but only another step towards something deeper, something that would shake him to his very core. The guru's smile, Sabal's world had narrowed to shadows. The market no longer welcomed him. His friends had turned their backs, and even within his home, voices of doubt replaced words of comfort. His debts pressed like chains, each demand pulling him further down. Nights passed without rest, days without peace. He felt like a man stranded in the desert, surrounded by mirages that mocked his thirst. In his despair, one thought returned again and again. The guru. That calm face, those steady eyes, the strange words that lingered after every meeting. Each time Sabal had come to him, he had been told the same thing, that his pain was not yet true suffering. At first, the words had stung. Later, they had confused him. But now, stripped of pride and hollowed by loss, Sabal wondered if perhaps the guru had seen something in him he had not seen in himself. With trembling steps, he made the journey back to the grove. The path felt longer this time, as though each stone carried the weight of his failures. By the time he reached the guru's dwelling, his body was weak, but his heart carried a fragile hope. He entered quietly, and there the guru sat, unchanged. The same robes, the same posture, the same silence that felt deeper than words. Sabal fell to his knees. His voice broke as he spoke of betrayal, of debts that crushed him, of friends who had become enemies. He told the guru of his sleepless nights, of his longing for escape, of his confusion. "I have lost everything," he said, tears spilling freely. "I have no wealth, no friends, no peace. Is this not suffering enough?" The guru listened without interruption. When Sabal finished, silence filled the room like water in a vessel. Then, slowly, the guru's lips curved into a smile, not mocking, not dismissive, but gentle, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Child," he said softly, "you have seen the world's fickle nature. You have learned that wealth can vanish, that friends can betray, that ambition can consume. These lessons are important. Yet this too is not the deepest suffering. There is more for you to see." Sabal's heart clenched. Again, the same refrain. Again, the suggestion that his pain was not final, not complete. He wanted to protest, to cry out, but the calmness in the guru's eyes stilled his voice. Instead, he lowered his head, feeling the strange mixture of frustration and relief. The guru rose and gestured toward the grove. "The jar you buried," he said. "Go to it." Sabal obeyed. His hands dug into the soil once more, pulling the jar from the earth. Its weight was familiar, its gold gleaming even in the dim light. He brought it back to the guru, unsure of what would happen next. The guru looked at it briefly, then shook his head. "This gold is of no use to me. Return it to the earth. Its time is not yet confused." Sabal carried the jar back to the tree and buried it again. As he pushed the soil over the lid, he realized the act felt heavier than before. It was not just gold he was covering, it was the illusion that gold could ever save him. When he returned, the guru's smile remained. It was not the smile of triumph, but of patience. "Go now," he said simply. "Live. When the truth of suffering finally comes, you will know." Sabal left the grove in silence. His heart was still heavy, but something about the guru's smile lingered in his mind. It was as though the old man had seen beyond his pain, beyond his confusion, into a place Sabal himself could not yet reach. If you've ever been told, "Not yet," when you were desperate for answers, you know the frustration that gripped Sabal. And yet, sometimes those words are not rejection, but preparation. If you've ever had to wait for clarity, share a word of patience in the comments. Someone tonight may need to hear it. As Sabal walked back into the world, the night air cooled his face. He was still burdened, still uncertain, but deep inside, a spark remained. The Guru's smile had planted something wordless in his heart, something he could not yet name. The road ahead would bring him new beginnings, but also new trials, and soon he would learn that rebuilding from honesty is slower, but far stronger than chasing gold. Starting again. The days after Sabal reburied the jar felt strangely quiet. The market still buzzed with voices, the creditors still knocked at doors, but something in him had shifted. It was as though the act of placing the gold back into the earth had closed one chapter and opened another. He no longer dreamed of sudden wealth or grand victories. Instead, he woke each morning with a simple thought. Start again, one step at a time. At first, it was humbling. Sabal could not afford to hire workers, nor could he manage multiple carts. He returned to a single wooden stall, small and plain, set up in a corner of the market. His goods were modest fresh fruit, a few jars of honey, nothing extravagant. Customers looked at him with curiosity, some with skepticism. "Isn't that the man who once tried to take over the market?" they whispered. Sabal felt the sting of their words, but he kept his head low and his hands steady. Day after day, he worked quietly. He greeted each customer with sincerity, weighed each item carefully, and made sure every coin's worth was fair. Slowly, the whispers softened. Mothers returned, trusting him again with their children's food. Old men stopped by, nodding with approval at his honesty. The profits were small, but they were clean. Each coin felt earned, not borrowed, not stolen, not stained. His family noticed the change. His mother's eyes no longer carried the same weight of worry. His father's silence eased into cautious pride. At dinner, the air felt warmer. There was less talk of debts, more talk of simple joys, how the garden was growing, how the weather might bless the crops. Sabal listened, grateful just to sit in that quiet space without the burden of lies. For the first time in years, he slept. Not deeply at first, but enough to feel rest return to his bones. The restless fire of ambition had dimmed, replaced by a steady glow. His dreams were not of kingdoms or riches, but of tomorrow's market, of greeting familiar faces, of steady hands stacking fruit. If you've ever had to start over from the bottom, you know how fragile that peace can feel. It's not easy to rebuild after losing so much, but sometimes starting small is the most powerful act. If you've experienced that in your own life, share a line in the comments. Someone listening tonight may need your reminder that beginnings can happen at any stage. Weeks turned into months, and Sabal's modest stall grew steady. He did not rush. He did not cut corners. His profits grew slowly but reliably, like water filling a vessel drop by drop. People began to trust him again, not because of his wealth, but because of his consistency. He learned to smile honestly, not with the sharpness of ambition, but with the softness of gratitude. There were still challenges. Rivals mocked his fall, creditors occasionally reminded him of old debts, and whispers of his past never completely vanished. But Sabal carried himself differently now. He no longer measured his worth by their voices. He measured it by his own effort, his own honesty, his own quiet peace. One evening, as the sun set over the market, Sabal closed his stall and looked at the coins in his hand. They were fewer than in his glory days, but they felt heavier, richer. He realized then that wealth was not in the number of coins, but in the weight of peace they carried. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled to himself without hesitation. Yet life, in its rhythm, never remained still. The lessons Sabal had learned were important, but the world was not finished with him. Greater trials still waited on the horizon, tests that would pierce deeper than failure, deeper than betrayal, deeper even than ambition. Because one day, suffering would arrive not through the marketplace, not through friends or debts, but through the loss of the ones he loved most. And that loss would lead him to the edge of life's most difficult questions. Quiet prosperity. Sabal's life settled into a rhythm that felt almost foreign after so many storms. Each morning he rose with the sun, arranged his modest stall, and greeted the marketplace not with fire in his chest, but with calm in his breath. He no longer rushed, no longer chased the dizzying highs of ambition. Instead, he measured his days by the weight of honest work and the quiet satisfaction of serving others. The market grew familiar again. Children called his name, their hands reaching eagerly for fruit. Mothers trusted his scales, knowing he would never cheat them. Even rivals, once hostile, gave him polite nods. They no longer saw him as a threat to outpace, but as a man who had learned his place. And Sabal, surprisingly, found no shame in that. His store was small, his earnings modest, yet the peace that settled over him felt richer than any empire he had once imagined. At home, the change was even more profound. His mother hummed softly while preparing meals. His father, though still stern, had a gentleness in his eyes that Sabal had not seen in years. Their table no longer carried the tension of debts and disappointments. Instead, it carried the warmth of shared food and quiet conversation. Sabal realized he had missed this more than any wealth. The nights brought sleep, real sleep, not the shallow, restless hours of his ambitious days, but deep, steady rest. He lay down without fear of creditors pounding on his door, without the weight of dishonest profit pressing on his chest. In the silence of the night, his breath flowed evenly, and for the first time in years, he felt safe inside his own skin. If you've ever experienced that shift from chaos to calm, from restlessness to peace, you know how precious it feels. And if you haven't yet, know that it's possible. Peace doesn't always arrive in grand moments. Often it comes quietly, like the sound of a fan in the dark or the gentle hum of life around you. If you've found a little peace lately, no matter how small, share it in the comments. Your words might encourage someone who's still searching. Months passed, and Sabal's stall became a trusted corner of the marketplace. He wasn't the wealthiest, nor the most powerful, but he had something his earlier self never understood: respect. People respected his honesty, his steadiness, his willingness to start over without excuses. He found joy in the simplicity of it, joy in recognizing familiar faces, joy in knowing that at the end of the day, his work had not harmed but nourished. One afternoon, as Sabal closed his store, he caught sight of the setting sun painting the rooftops in gold. He stood quietly, watching the light fade, and felt a wave of gratitude. Life was not what he once dreamed, but it was more real, more grounded, more peaceful. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "This is enough." But life has a way of testing even the most peaceful hearts. The world does not stop turning simply because a man has found balance. Beneath the surface of his quiet prosperity, change was waiting. A greater sorrow than any debt, any betrayal, any failure was approaching, and it would strip away the comfort he had built. For all his lessons in ambition and honesty, Sabal was not yet prepared for the one truth that humbles every life: the inevitability of loss. And when that loss came, it would challenge him more deeply than any storm before. The inevitable loss. The season shifted slowly, leaves turning brittle, air cooling in the evenings, but Sabal hardly noticed. His days had grown steady, his work predictable, his home warmed by simple joys. After years of storms, this calm felt like a gift he never thought he would hold. Yet beneath the rhythm of his quiet prosperity, fate was preparing its sharpest lesson. One morning, his mother grew ill. At first, it was small, just a cough, a weakness in her hands. Sabal carried her bowls to the table, thinking it would pass, but the days stretched and her body grew frail. His father, once so firm, now sat at her side, his eyes shadowed with fear he would not voice. Sabal worked the market by day, but his mind was always back home, listening for her breath. Weeks passed, and his father's health too began to fail. It was as if the two were bound together, sharing one thread of life that began to fray at the same time. Sabal tried everything. Herbs, doctors, prayers whispered into the night, but the weight of mortality pressed too heavily. His stall, once his pride, became just a place to earn enough for medicine that bought little more than time. Then the day came when both of his parents slipped away, one following the other, as though they had agreed not to walk this path alone. Sabal stood at the funeral pyre, the flames licking the sky, his heart breaking as he watched the smoke carry their bodies into silence. He had faced debt, betrayal, failure, but nothing prepared him for the hollow ache of this moment. The market felt distant now. The sound of coins meant nothing. Success, failure, ambition, all seemed like shadows compared to the loss of the voices that once called his name with love. He wandered the rooms of his home, staring at the empty chairs, the belongings left behind. He thought of his father's strong hands, his mother's gentle hum, and realized how quickly life had stolen them away. If you've ever lost someone you love, you know the silence that follows. It is not just the absence of their voice, it's the way every corner of your world feels emptier, the way even your breath feels heavier. If you've carried that silence and somehow found strength to keep going, share a word of comfort in the comments. Someone listening tonight may be standing where Sabal stood, and your words might be the hand they need. Days turned into weeks, and Sabal moved through them like a man drifting in water. The stall still stood, the fruit still sold, but his spirit was fractured. He no longer thought of ambition or betrayal. He no longer dreamed of wealth. Instead, a new question consumed him. What is life worth if it always ends in death? He sat alone at night, staring into the emptiness, feeling the weight of impermanence pressing against him. His parents had spent their lives working, saving, building, only to leave it all behind in a single breath. What use was wealth? What use was struggle, if in the end, everything turned to ash? The Guru's words echoed faintly in his mind. Return when true suffering finds you. Sabal clenched his fists. Was this the moment? Was this grief the suffering the Guru had spoken of? It felt sharper than debt, deeper than betrayal, more final than ambition. Yet he sensed there was still something more. Something beyond even this pain, waiting for him to understand. The pyres had burned down to embers, the ashes cooled, but inside Sabal, the fire of grief still raged. And soon it would drive him once more to seek answers he could not find alone. Ashes and silence. The funeral fires had faded, but the smoke lingered in Sabal's memory. He could still see the flames devouring the wood, could still hear the crackle that marked the final moments of his parents' bodies on this earth. He had stood there until the embers cooled, until the crowd dispersed, until the silence wrapped itself around him like a cloak he could not remove. Back at home, the quiet was unbearable. Every corner carried echoes. His father's chair sat empty, his mother's woven shawl hung untouched on a hook. The rooms that once felt alive now seemed hollow, as if the house itself mourned with him. Sabal moved through it like a shadow, placing his hand on familiar objects, feeling how strange it was that they remained while the people who used them were gone. In the market, life continued. Children laughed, merchants shouted, coins clinked, but Sabal felt as though he were walking underwater. He went through the motions, stacking fruit, weighing produce, but each smile felt forced, each word spoken as if from a great distance. His customers noticed the heaviness in his eyes, but they said nothing. The world does not pause for one man's grief. At night, the silence deepened. The hum of insects, the rustle of wind outside, even the creak of the house, all became reminders of absence. He remembered how his mother used to hum before bed, how his father used to clear his throat before speaking. Now there was nothing. Sabal lay awake, staring into the dark, and wondered if silence itself was another form of suffering. If you've ever sat in a room made empty by loss, you know how heavy silence can feel. It is not just quiet. It is a presence, pressing against your chest, reminding you of what is gone. If you've known that silence and found a way to live alongside it, share your wisdom in the comments. Someone listening tonight might need your words. One evening, Sabal returned to the ashes. He stood where the fire had burned, staring at the grey dust that remained. The wind lifted small clouds of it into the air, carrying it away piece by piece. He crouched, scooped a handful, and let it fall through his fingers. It clung briefly, then scattered, vanishing into the breeze. In that moment, he felt the truth pierce him. Everything ends. Not just wealth, not just success or failure, but life itself. His parents had spent years working, fighting, worrying, and now all of it lay in a pile of dust. He sat by the ashes until the stars rose, asking questions he could not answer. What was the point of building, of striving, if it all burned away in the end? Why gather wealth? Why chase ambition, when none of it followed you beyond the fire? The grief in his chest twisted into confusion, into restlessness that no sleep could soothe. When he finally returned home, the emptiness felt sharper than ever. He realized that even though the market still moved, even though life around him went on, he could not escape the feeling that everything was fragile, temporary, slipping away moment by moment. And in that realization, the silence grew heavier. The ashes of his parents were gone, carried by the wind, but the silence they left behind stayed. And that silence would not let him rest until he found answers deeper than any the world had given him so far. The question of death. The days after the funeral stretched long and grey. Sabal moved through them like a man half awake, going to the market, arranging his store, exchanging coins with customers, but inside he was far away. Every sound of laughter reminded him of silence at home. Every glimpse of an elderly couple reminded him of what he had lost. And every night, when the streets emptied, he found himself returning in thought to the pyres, to the ashes, to the finality of fire. He began to wonder if death was the only truth that mattered. His parents had lived full lives, had built, had saved, had fought for every coin, and yet, in one day, it was all gone. Their home, their belongings, their memories lingered, but they themselves were no more. Sabal could not make sense of it. If death erased everything, then what was the meaning of life at all? In his turmoil, he returned once more to the Guru. The grove was quiet, filled with the rustle of leaves. The master sat as always, still unshaken by the storms of the world. Sabal knelt, his voice heavy with grief. "Master, my parents are gone. Both in one day, both taken from me. I cannot escape the sorrow. I see their faces in my mind. I hear their voices in my dreams, but when I wake, the silence crushes me. Why must life end this way?" The Guru looked at him steadily and replied, "Why are you surprised? One day, I will die. One day you will die. Death is not the enemy, it is part of the path. The young die, the old die, the strong and the weak alike. No one is spared." Sabal's eyes widened. "But Master, I am still young. I have time." The Guru shook his head gently. Do you think death waits for age? Children die, youth die, kings die, beggars die. Death belongs to no schedule. It comes when it will. The words pierced Sabal deeper than any debt or betrayal ever had. He had always thought of death as a distant horizon, something for later, something for old age. But here, the Guru spoke of it as a constant presence, standing beside him even now. If you've ever had a moment when you realized how fragile life really is, you know the shock that gripped Sabal. It changes the way you see everything, your plans, your worries, even your breath. If you felt that awareness before, share how it changed you in the comments. Someone listening tonight may need to hear your reminder that life is more temporary than we often believe. Sabal sat in silence, his heart pounding. He wanted to protest, to argue, to insist that youth was protection, that his life still stretched long before him. But the truth of the Guru's words left no space for denial. He remembered the ashes slipping through his fingers, the empty chairs at home, the suddenness of it all. For the first time, he realized that he too could vanish in a single breath, that everything he clung to, his work, his coins, even his questions, could be taken at any moment. The weight of that truth pressed on him, terrifying and clarifying at once. He left the grove quietly, the Guru's words echoing in his mind. Death was not a shadow waiting far away. It was here, now, beside him. And with that realization, new questions began to stir. Questions deeper than wealth, deeper than ambition, deeper even than grief. Questions that would not leave him until he found their answers. Restless mind. After hearing the Guru's words, Sabal walked back through the town as though he were moving inside a dream. The streets bustled as always, children laughing, merchants shouting, coins exchanging hands. But all of it felt faint, like voices drifting from another world. What echoed loudest inside him was the reminder that death did not wait for age, that it could come for anyone at any time. At night, when he tried to rest, the thought pressed harder. He would lie still on his mat, staring into the shadows, and whisper to himself, "What if tonight is my last breath? What if I never see the sun again?" His chest would tighten, his heart racing as though trying to outrun the question. And even when dawn came, it brought no relief, only another day filled with the same haunting uncertainty. The market offered no escape. As he weighed fruit or counted coins, he found himself wondering, what use are these things if death can take me before the day ends? He looked at his customers and wondered if they too carried this fear, or if they were still blind to it. He envied their laughter, their careless chatter, their trust in tomorrow. For Sabal, tomorrow no longer felt promised. His mind would not rest. Even when he sat quietly, thoughts crowded in, one after another, questions layered upon questions. Who am I? Really, why am I here? If all ends in death, what is the purpose of this life? These were not questions the market could answer, not questions coins or goods could soothe. They rose from somewhere deeper, and they demanded more than distractions. If you've ever had nights when your thoughts refused to let you go, when your mind circled endlessly around questions you could not silence, you know the exhaustion Sabal felt. It's like running without moving, spinning without rest. If you've been there, share in the comments how you find calm when your mind won't stop. Your words might give someone else a lantern in their own restless night. As days passed, Sabal grew quieter. Friends noticed the faraway look in his eyes. Customers saw his pauses, the way his gaze drifted beyond the market stalls. His work became slower, not from laziness, but because every task felt swallowed by questions. The fruit he sold seemed meaningless, the coins he collected weightless. He was haunted not by what he lacked, but by not knowing why he existed at all. One evening, unable to bear the storm inside him, he returned once more to the grove. The guru greeted him with the same stillness as if no time had passed. Sabal fell to his knees, his voice trembling. "Master, I am not only grieving. I am lost. I cannot answer the questions in my heart. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of this life if death will erase it all? These thoughts consume me. I cannot eat. I cannot sleep. I cannot find peace. Tell me, please, what is the meaning of this?" The guru looked at him with compassion, and for the first time, a small spark of approval lit his eyes. "Now," he said softly, "you have touched true suffering." The words sank into Sabal like a stone into deep water. True suffering was not failure, not betrayal, not debt or loss. It was this: not knowing who you are, not understanding why you live, being torn apart by questions with no answers, and though the words brought clarity, they also left Sabal trembling. For now, he knew that the greater storm was not around him, but within him. Return. Once more. The night after the guru spoke of true suffering, Sabal could not quiet his heart. He had thought he understood pain when he was mocked by neighbors, when debts strangled him, when friends betrayed him, when his parents were taken from him, but this was different. This was not a wound that bled or a loss that could be measured. It was emptiness itself, a hollow question that echoed through his mind with no walls to contain it. He returned to the marketplace the next morning, but his stall felt meaningless. Each apple he placed on the scale, each coin that touched his palm, seemed absurd in the face of the question, "Who am I? Why am I here?" He watched customers laugh and chatter as if they had never thought of it. And he envied them. He wanted their ignorance, their ability to keep moving without the weight of these questions. At home, the silence was worse. Every chair, every object reminded him of how temporary life was. He asked himself, did my parents know who they were? Did they ever wonder why they lived, or were they too busy surviving? The thought both comforted and terrified him. Perhaps most people never asked these questions. Perhaps that was why they could live so easily, but Sabal could not stop asking. He woke in the night and whispered the words into the dark, his breath trembling. Who am I? Why am I here? His chest ached with the weight of not knowing. Food lost its taste, rest fled from him, and the world around him dimmed. At last, unable to bear it, he returned once more to the grove. The guru was there, seated as always, as if the earth itself held him steady. Sabal bowed low, his voice breaking. Master, I cannot escape these questions. They fill me night and day. I do not care for coins or carts or reputation. I do not even care for survival. I only need to know, who am I? And why am I here? Without this answer, life feels like a cruel riddle. Tell me, please. I am ready. The guru looked at him with a depth that seemed to hold both the sky and the soil. He did not speak at once. He let the silence breathe, until Sabal felt both crushed and steadied by it. Finally, the guru said, Now you have arrived at the doorway. True suffering is not hunger, not loss, not betrayal. It is the pain of not knowing yourself. It is the restlessness of living divided, scattered, lost. And it is only when you feel this fully that you are ready to begin the real work. The words struck Sabal with both relief and dread. Relief, because finally the master acknowledged his suffering as real. Dread, because it meant his journey was not over, but only just beginning. If you've ever reached a point where the usual answers no longer satisfied you, where money, success, even comfort felt empty, you understand what Sabal felt. That ache for meaning is the beginning of something deeper. If you've been there, share in the comments what questions kept you awake. Someone tonight may need to see that their restless heart is not alone. Sabal sat in the grove long into the evening, absorbing the weight of the guru's words. He felt as though the world had shifted. The marketplace, the coins, the betrayals, they were no longer the heart of his suffering. The heart was here, in the hollow questions that cut through everything else. And though it terrified him, it also gave him a strange strength. When he finally rose to leave, the stars had begun to scatter across the sky. He looked up at them and whispered, "If this is true suffering, then let me learn what it means." His steps were heavy but steady as he walked back into the night. He knew the path ahead would not be simple, but for the first time, he felt he was walking towards something real. True suffering. The night sky above him stretched wide, dotted with stars that seemed to shimmer with secrets. Sabal walked home slowly, his heart heavy yet sharpened by the guru's words. For years he had thought suffering was failure, or betrayal, or poverty, or even grief. But now he saw that those pains, as sharp as they were, had only been stepping stones. The deeper suffering was here, inside him, gnawing with questions that no wealth, no friend, no comfort could soothe. True suffering was not the loss of what was outside, it was the emptiness within. It was the restless torment of not knowing himself, of living divided and scattered. That realization clung to him like a shadow. It followed him into his home, into the market, into his sleep. The world seemed unchanged, but he was no longer the same. Each morning, Sabal rose to arrange his stall, but the work felt hollow. Customers smiled, coins dropped, yet behind every exchange he heard the whisper, "Who are you? Why are you here?" He carried baskets of fruit, but the weight that pressed most heavily was the weight of those unanswered questions. He began to notice how scattered his own life had been. Every ambition had pulled him one way, every fear another. Desire, anger, envy, pride, and all fragments pulling him apart. He saw how little of himself was whole, how little of his life had ever been unified. He had been a man divided, chasing shadows, never knowing the substance of who he truly was. At night, as he lay awake, he thought of the guru's calm presence. The old man's silence had spoken louder than his words. Sabal realized that true suffering was not meant to destroy him, but to open him, to tear away the illusions until only the raw question remained. Who am I? That was the doorway the guru had spoken of. If you've ever reached a point where nothing outside could quiet the storm inside, you've touched the edge of what Sabal felt. It's a frightening place, but it's also the beginning of something new. If you've been there, write a few words of encouragement in the comments. Someone listening tonight might need to know that the hollow ache they feel is not a curse, but a sign of awakening. Sabal walked through his days like a man both burdened and awakened. He no longer envied those who laughed easily, for he knew they had not yet touched the depth he had found. He no longer measured himself against rivals or debts. Instead, he measured the distance between who he was and the truth he longed to see. One evening, he returned to the grove again, unable to carry the questions alone. He knelt before the guru and whispered, "Master, the questions do not leave me. I see now that this is suffering greater than failure or loss. Please, tell me how to bear it. Tell me how to find myself." The guru looked at him with eyes as steady as stone and said, "Now you are ready. The suffering you feel is not your enemy. It is the teacher that has brought you here. To find yourself, you must gather yourself. You are scattered in desires, in fears, in pride, in grief. Collect your fragments. Become whole. Only then will you see who you are." The words sank deep, but they were not answers in themselves. They were instructions. Sabal realized that his path was not about waiting for the guru to solve his pain. It was about turning inward, gathering his broken pieces, and facing himself. The realization frightened him, but it also lit a small flame of courage. He left the grove that night with no gold, no promises of comfort, but with something greater, a direction. The road ahead would not be easy, but at last he knew where to walk. And though his suffering still clung to him, it no longer felt like chains. It felt like the very key he had been searching for, scattered within, scattered. The days that followed felt different, though the market looked the same, though the houses and streets of the town had not changed. What shifted was inside Sabal. He could see more clearly how divided he had been, how much of his life had been scattered across endless desires and fears. He sold fruit by day, but while his hands weighed apples and counted coins, his mind replayed the Guru's words. Gather yourself, become whole. Only then will you see who you are. The truth stung. Sabal realized he had been pulled apart piece by piece. A fragment of him had been tied to ambition, always looking toward what others had and wanting more. Another fragment lived in fear, worried about failure, about judgment, about betrayal. A piece of him still burned with anger at those who mocked or abandoned him. Another clung to grief, replaying the loss of his parents, and all of these fragments fought for his attention, leaving him exhausted, torn in too many directions to ever feel whole. He began to watch the people around him with new eyes. He saw merchants shouting at rivals, their voices sharp with envy. He saw neighbors gossiping, their words fueled by jealousy and pride. He saw children chasing toys and sweets with a desperation that mirrored his own cravings. Everywhere, people lived divided, pulled in 100 directions, scattered like leaves in the wind. And, for the first time, Sabal realized he was not alone in his brokenness. Humanity itself lived scattered, but knowing it did not make it easier to change. At night, when he tried to rest, his thoughts still fractured. He remembered debts, replayed old betrayals, imagined futures that never came. His chest tightened as he whispered to himself, "How do I gather what has been torn apart?" The question kept him awake, just as much as the grief and ambition once had. If you've ever felt scattered, pulled in too many directions at once, you know the exhaustion Sabal faced. It's not just physical tiredness. It's the weariness of never feeling whole. If you've found a way to bring your pieces back together, even a little, share in the comments. Someone listening tonight might be searching for that same thread of wholeness. Sabal returned to the Guru again, unable to keep the questions inside. He bowed low and asked, "Master, I see now how divided I am. My heart is scattered in grief, fear, desire, and pride. How do I gather myself? How do I stop living in fragments?" The Guru's eyes softened. "Look within," he said. "Notice each piece. Do not run from them. Do not cling to them. See them clearly and slowly. They will return to you. You are not your desires, not your fears, not your grief. They are waves on the surface. Beneath them, you are the still water. Gather your awareness, and the waves will settle." The words were simple, but they struck Sabal deeply. He had spent his life fighting, clinging, resisting, chasing. He had never thought to simply see, to notice without judgment, to allow his fragments to rest until they rejoined. That evening he sat quietly in his room. Instead of pacing, instead of forcing answers, he closed his eyes and breathed. At first, his thoughts rushed louder than ever. Memories, worries, longings. But he let them pass. He whispered to himself, "These are not me. These are waves. Beneath them, I am the water." For the first time, a fragile stillness touched him. It did not last long, but it was enough to show him the possibility. The journey of gathering himself had only begun. The work would be slow, the distractions many, the temptations strong. But Sabal felt a small flame of hope. If he could gather even a fraction of his scattered pieces, he might finally see himself clearly. And in that vision, perhaps, he would find peace. The empty hands, the weeks that followed, felt like walking along the edge of a quiet river. Sabal continued his work at the store. continued speaking to customers, continued counting coins, but inside he was studying himself in a new way. Every desire that tugged at him, every pang of fear, every flicker of anger, he tried to notice them without being carried away. At first it was clumsy. His mind raced like a restless horse, but slowly he learned to hold the reins. One evening he returned to the guru again. He bowed low, his voice soft but steady. "Master, I have begun to see how scattered I am. But even as I notice these pieces, I cannot shake the truth that life ends in death. My parents worked, saved, built, but they carried nothing with them beyond the fire. If death takes everything, what is the point of all we gather? Why do we cling to coins, to houses, to possessions, when none of it can remain in our hands?" The guru looked at him with a gaze both sharp and gentle. "You are right," he said. "No man carries wealth beyond the fire. Not kings, not beggars, not merchants. In the end, all hands are empty. But this truth is not meant to bring despair. It is meant to free you. For when you know that nothing can be carried away, you can stop clinging so tightly. You can hold what comes with gratitude and let it go without fear." The words struck Sabal deeply. He thought of his parents, of their years of work, their careful saving, their worries over possessions that had now become nothing but silent objects. He thought of his own years chasing coins, the debts, the sleepless nights, the hunger for more. All of it had been driven by the illusion that he could hold on to something forever. Now he saw it clearly. Every hand must open. Every possession must be left behind. If you've ever realized that the things you worked hardest for may not last, you know the strange mix of sadness and relief Sabal felt. It hurts to see how fragile it all is, but it also frees you to focus on what truly matters. If you've had a moment like that, share it in the comments. Your story may remind someone listening tonight that letting go can also be a kind of peace. Sabal sat with the guru long into the evening, listening as the master spoke. When you were young, you thought suffering was poverty. Later, you thought it was betrayal. Then you thought it was grief. But now you see, suffering is not the loss of what is outside you. It is the blindness of never knowing who you are inside. When death strips away your wealth, your name, your possessions, what remains is only yourself. Gather that, and you will not leave this world empty-handed. The fireflies rose from the grass as the night deepened, their small lights flickering like distant stars. Sabal felt the words settle into him, not as comfort, but as truth. He thought of the coins he had once buried in the jar, the weight he had carried, the illusion that they could save him. And now, he understood why the guru had told him to return them to the earth. Gold could never fill empty hands. Only the self, gathered and whole, could do that. When he returned home, Sabal sat quietly in the darkness. He looked at the coins he had earned that day, stacked neatly on the table. For the first time, he did not see them as proof of his worth or promises of security. He saw them as what they truly were, temporary, passing through his hands like water. And with that shift, a lightness entered him. He still needed to eat, still needed to live, but the chains of possession had loosened. The journey was not finished, but the lesson was clear. All hands end empty. The question was no longer what he could hold, but who he could become before he had to let go. Gather yourself. The next mornings in the market felt lighter, though nothing outwardly had changed. The same carts rolled through the square, the same voices called prices, the same coins clinked in open hands. But Sabal moved differently. He still worked hard, arranging fruit with care, smiling at familiar faces, but now he did not clutch at each coin as though his life depended on it. He accepted what came, and when it passed out of his hands again, he let it go. His chest no longer tightened with fear of loss. Yet when the evenings came, the restless questions returned. Sitting in the dim light of his home, Sabal whispered to himself, "If all hands end empty, then who am I, really? What am I meant to carry?" The Guru's words echoed, "Gather yourself. Become whole." But how? How does a man scattered by grief, torn by ambition, and hollowed by loss bring himself back together? Unable to find the answer alone, he went again to the grove. The Guru was waiting, as though he had known Sabal would return. Sabal bowed and asked, "Master, I understand now that possessions cannot stay. I know that wealth and status are illusions, but still I feel divided. How do I gather myself? How do I stop being scattered?" The Guru replied slowly, letting each word rest in the air. "You are scattered because you have given your energy to everything outside you. You have poured yourself into ambition, into fear, into grief, into pride, and so you are left broken, chasing pieces of yourself that will never return. Call your energy back. Bring your awareness inward. Let the world be what it is, but gather yourself into the present moment. In wholeness, you will meet yourself." The words felt like a lantern lit inside Sabal. He realized how much of himself he had abandoned. Every sleepless night had been a gift of his energy to fear. Every betrayal he replayed was a gift of his energy to anger. Every dream of riches was a gift of his energy to desire. Piece by piece, he had scattered himself into the world until there was little left to call his own. That night, instead of pacing, he sat still. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. His thoughts came rushing. Memories, worries, longings, but he did not chase them. He whispered quietly, "I call myself back. I gather what I have lost." At first it felt foolish, but slowly a calmness crept in. His chest loosened, his breath steadied. For the first time, he felt a glimpse of what it might mean to be whole. If you've ever felt like your energy was scattered, spread thin by worries, by demands, by chasing what doesn't last, you know the weariness Sabal carried. And if you've ever taken a moment to breathe, to draw yourself back into the present, you know how powerful it can feel. If you've tried that, share in the comments what helps you gather yourself. Someone listening tonight might need your practice to steady their own heart. In the days that followed, Sabal began small rituals of gathering. When fear rose, he breathed and whispered, "This is not me. This is passing." When grief struck, he let the tears fall, but he reminded himself, "I remain beneath the sorrow." When ambition tempted him, he smiled and said, "I do not need to chase what fades." Each act was small, but together they began to weave him back together. The marketplace noticed too. His smile was gentler, his movement steadier, his presence calmer. People lingered at his stall, not only for fruit, but for the peace they felt in his company. Sabal did not plan it, but he was becoming a mirror of the stillness he sought. One evening, as he closed his stall and watched the sunset bleed across the rooftops, he whispered, "I am not finished, but I am not broken either. I am gathering." The words gave him courage. For the first time, he sensed that the path was not about becoming something new, but about returning to what he had always been: whole, steady, unshaken. Yet even as he felt this new strength, he knew the journey was not complete. The Guru had shown him the doorway, but deeper truths still waited beyond it. Illusions of desire. The air in the market felt different to Sabal now. He still sold fruit, still exchanged coins, but he no longer felt the pull that once drove him to exhaustion. Desire used to be his master desire for wealth, for respect, for recognition. Each longing had promised joy, but each time he reached it, the joy slipped through his fingers like water. Now, with the Guru's words echoing inside him, he began to see desire for what it truly was, an illusion that kept him chasing shadows. He noticed how desire whispered not just in him, but in everyone around him. Children begged their parents for sweets, certain the next taste would make them happy. Merchants shouted loudly, desperate for more customers, believing one more sale would fill the emptiness. Neighbors compared homes and clothes, measuring their worth by what they owned. Everywhere Sabal looked, he saw people running after something just out of reach, convinced that once they caught it, their lives would be complete. But he knew now that completion never came. At night, Sabal sat quietly, breathing into the silence. Memories rose of his own restless years, chasing carts, chasing profit, chasing admiration. He remembered the thrill of each success, the crash of each failure, the endless cycle that left him hollow. He whispered into the dark, "Desire never ends. It only changes shape." If you've ever thought, "I'll be happy when you get the job, when you earn the money, when you find the relationship," you know the illusion Sabal faced. That voice promises peace just around the corner, but when you arrive, it points to another corner and another. If you've seen through that pattern in your own life, share it in the comments. Your insight may be the reminder someone tonight needs to step out of the chase. One morning, Sabal returned to the guru and asked, "Master, if desire is endless, how do we escape it? How do we live without being chained to its illusions?" The guru replied, "Desire is not evil. It is simply a wave. The trouble comes when you believe the wave is the ocean. You chase it, thinking it will bring you wholeness, but it always rises and falls. See desire for what it is. Passing, fleeting, and you will no longer be its prisoner. When you no longer cling to each wave, you will begin to rest in the still water beneath." The words struck Sabal like cool rain. For so long, he had believed he needed to fight desire, to conquer it, to silence it completely. But the guru was not telling him to destroy desire. He was telling him to see it, to understand its nature, and in that understanding, to stop chasing. That evening, Sabal tried. When a thought of ambition stirred, "If I expand the stall, I could earn more." He smiled softly and said, "That is only a wave." When grief tugged at him with memories of his parents, he placed his hand over his chest and whispered, "This too is a wave." Slowly, he felt the water beneath, steady, unbroken. The next day in the market, a rival merchant mocked him, saying, "You once dreamed of ruling this place, and now you're content with scraps." In the past, the words would have burned him, but Sabal only smiled faintly and thought, "Even this sting is a wave. It will pass." He went back to his stall with steady hands, feeling freer than he had in years. By learning to see desire as illusion, Sabal had taken another step inward, another step toward gathering himself. But he sensed that the path went deeper still. For beneath desire lay the question of control, of whether a man truly guided his life, or whether he was merely carried by forces he did not understand. And soon, the guru would reveal that the scattered mind, once gathered, could become something far greater than Sabal had ever imagined. The center, within. The days unfolded with a softer rhythm now. Sabal no longer rushed through the market or clung to every coin as though it might save him. He worked steadily, quietly, but his attention was not only on the fruit in his hands. More and more, it turned inward. Each time a thought of desire rose, he noticed it. Each time grief or anger stirred, he named it a passing wave. He was beginning to sense the water beneath, the stillness the guru had spoken of. Yet he knew he had not reached the center. One evening he returned again to the grove. The guru sat as always, calm, still, the silence around him deeper than words. Sabal bowed and said, "Master, I can see my desires now. I know they rise and fall, but even when I see them, I still feel pulled, still feel shaken. How do I find the place beneath the waves? How do I reach the center within?" The guru lifted his eyes and said, "The center has never left you. It is here, now, beneath your breath. You cannot chase it, for chasing only leads you further away. You must stop running. Sit in your own silence. Gather your mind until it rests in one place. When you no longer scatter yourself into 1,000 thoughts, you will feel the center that was always there. The words were simple, but they struck Sabal like a bell. That night he did not pace his room or let his thoughts run wild. Instead, he sat cross-legged, closed his eyes, and breathed slowly. At first, his mind protested. Memories of his parents' faces came. Voices of creditors returned. Ambitions whispered. But he did not chase them. He pictured them as leaves floating down a river, drifting away. He kept returning to his breath, steady, quiet, patient. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually something shifted. His chest loosened. His thoughts slowed. Beneath the noise, he felt a stillness. Not grand, not dramatic, but steady, like the earth beneath his feet. For the first time, he touched the center within. It was not something he had to create. It had always been there, waiting for him to notice. If you've ever found a moment of stillness in the middle of chaos, whether through meditation, prayer, or simply breathing, you know the relief Sabal felt. Even a few seconds of true calm can feel like stepping out of a storm. If you've had that experience, share it in the comments. Your words might remind someone that peace isn't far away. It's already inside them. The next day in the market, Sabal carried this stillness with him. A customer argued about the price of fruit, but instead of reacting sharply, he smiled and answered calmly. A rival merchant mocked him again, but the words no longer pierced him. They were just sounds, passing air. He felt anchored in something deeper, something that could not be shaken by the world outside. Each evening he returned to his practice, sitting quietly, breathing steadily, watching thoughts rise and fall. Some nights the waves were strong, some nights the stillness came quickly, but always he returned. Slowly, the fragments of himself began to gather. His grief no longer tore him apart. His desires no longer ruled him. His anger no longer scattered him. Bit by bit, he was becoming whole. And with each step inward, Sabal realized something profound. The world outside had not changed. The market was still noisy. People were still envious. Life was still uncertain. But his experience of it had changed completely. The center within was a place the world could not touch. And from that place, he could live differently. Yet the guru had hinted there was even more, that when a man truly gathered himself, the mind became not only still but powerful. A strength lay hidden in that center, waiting to be discovered. And Sabal was about to learn that his own mind, once scattered and restless, was capable of far more than he had ever imagined. The powerful machine. The days began to flow more smoothly for Sabal. His stall remained modest, his profits simple, but he carried himself with a new calm. What once felt like storms of desire or waves of grief now came and went like passing weather. At night, when he sat cross-legged in silence, he touched the stillness again and again. The center within him grew more familiar, like a well he could return to whenever he was thirsty. Yet he sensed there was more. Each time he looked into the guru's eyes, he saw something deeper, a strength he had not yet uncovered. One evening, Sabal asked, "Master, I have begun to gather myself. I feel the stillness within me, but what lies beyond it? What do we become when we are whole?" The guru's gaze was steady, his words deliberate. A man gathered within himself is like a powerful machine. The body is strong, the mind is sharp, the spirit is vast. But most people scatter their energy into countless distractions. Desire, fear, anger, envy. And so the machine sputters, wasting its fuel. If a man learns to gather himself, his energy becomes immense. He can live fully, see clearly, and act with purpose. His power is no longer wasted. It becomes light. The words stirred Sabal deeply. He had always thought of himself as weak, as a man crushed by life's weight. But now he saw that his weakness had not been from lack of strength, but from scattering his strength into every corner of the world. He had given away his power with every restless thought, every longing, every grudge. If he could call it back, if he could focus it, he might discover a strength he had never known. That night, Sabal sat in silence with renewed determination. He breathed slowly, gathered his thoughts, and imagined his energy returning to him. With each breath, he whispered, "I am whole. I am steady." His body tingled. His chest grew lighter, his mind clearer. He felt as though a hidden current of power was flowing through him, subtle but steady, like a river beneath the ground. If you've ever had a moment where you realized you were stronger than you thought, you know what Sabal felt. Maybe it came in a crisis, maybe in silence, maybe in the simple act of not giving up. If you've discovered strength in yourself, share it in the comments. Someone listening tonight might need to hear that they too carry more power than they realize. In the marketplace, Sabal's presence began to shift. Customers noticed his calm focus, the way he gave his attention fully, as if nothing else existed in that moment. Rivals mocked less often, unsettled by the steady peace in his eyes. Even when disputes arose, his voice carried a quiet authority that ended arguments before they began. People could not name it, but they felt it. Sabal had changed. He too noticed the difference. Tasks that once exhausted him now felt lighter. Problems that once consumed him now appeared smaller, manageable. His mind no longer scattered into 100 anxious paths. Instead, it moved like a single, focused stream. He had not become a different man. He had simply gathered the man he already was. One evening, while closing his stall, Sabal thought of the Guru's words. A powerful machine. He looked at his hands, once trembling with fear, now steady. He felt his breath, once shallow with restlessness, now calm. He realized the Guru was right. Human beings are not weak, but powerful beyond measure when their energy is gathered. The tragedy is not that people lack strength, but that they waste it, scattering themselves until nothing remains. For Sabal, the path ahead was clear. He would keep gathering himself, keep drawing back what he had lost, keep living from the center within, and slowly he would learn to use this strength not only for his own peace, but to live wisely in the world. But even as this strength grew, life would not stop testing him. The waves of the world would still rise, still try to scatter him again. And Sabal would need to choose, each day, whether to remain whole or to fall back into fragments. Sabal's awakening. The weeks that followed carried Sabal into a new kind of living. He still walked the same streets, still tended the same stall, but the world around him no longer had the same hold on his heart. When a customer grew angry over a price, he listened patiently and answered calmly. When a rival merchant muttered insults under his breath, Sabal smiled faintly and let the words pass like wind through trees. Even when profits were low and the day felt long, his chest no longer burned with anxiety. He had begun to awaken, not to something new, but to something that had always been waiting within him. Each evening, when he sat in silence and gathered himself, he felt the scattered pieces of his being draw closer together. The grief that once tore him apart softened into memory. The ambition that once drove him restless turned into quiet motivation to serve honestly. The fear that once kept him awake at night loosened its grip. He was no longer a man pulled apart by the world. He was a man becoming whole. This wholeness showed itself in small ways. A child who once feared him now lingered at his stall, sensing the gentleness in his eyes. A neighbor who had mocked him before now stopped to chat, drawn by the calm presence Sabal carried. Even his own body felt lighter. as if the knots in his muscles and the tightness in his chest were unwinding. He realized that awakening was not a sudden bolt of lightning, but a steady dawn, spreading light slowly until the darkness receded. If you've ever gone through a time when your inner world shifted, when you felt more present, more calm, more connected, you know what Sabal was experiencing. Awakening doesn't always announce itself loudly. Often it comes in small breaths, in moments of clarity, in a sudden sense that you are no longer at war with yourself. If you've had such a moment, share it in the comments. Someone listening tonight may need the reminder that awakening can begin quietly. One evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops, Sabal closed his stall and sat on the steps nearby. The marketplace quieted, merchants packing their goods, families returning home. He watched it all with new eyes. Once, he would have seen competition, opportunity, threats. Now, he saw human lives. Each person carrying their own struggles, their own desires, their own fragments scattered through the world. He realized he was not the only one searching. Everyone around him was walking their own path of suffering, even if they did not name it. He whispered softly, almost in prayer, "May I learn not only for myself, but for others too." The words surprised him. They rose from a place he had not expected, a place that cared not just for his own peace, but for the peace of those around him. Awakening, he realized, was not only about gathering himself, it was about learning to see beyond himself, to recognize the shared humanity in every face. The next day in the market, he practiced this new vision. He listened more deeply to customers, not only to their words, but to the weight behind them. He greeted rivals without bitterness. He even gave extra fruit to a poor family, feeling no loss, only quiet joy. These were small acts, but they revealed something larger, that awakening, once begun, changes how you touch the world. And yet, Sabal knew the path was not complete. He had touched stillness, discovered strength, begun to awaken, but the world would still test him. Desire would still whisper. Fear would still rise. Loss would still come. The difference now was that he no longer feared the tests. He welcomed them, for each test was a chance to practice wholeness. That night, as he lay down to sleep, Sabal closed his eyes with a steady breath. For the first time in many years, he did not wonder what tomorrow would bring. He only whispered, "I am here. I am whole." And that is enough. With those words, he drifted into deep rest, his awakening unfolding quietly, like a dawn that promised even more light to come. Midnight peace. The night air was cool, carrying with it the faint hum of crickets. Sabal sat outside his small home, the market long closed. The town settled into silence. He leaned back against the wall, looking up at the sky. Stars scattered overhead like grains of salt across dark velvet, and for the first time in years, he felt no weight pressing on his chest. His breath was slow, his body at ease. What once had been endless nights of restlessness and fear were now nights of quiet presence. He thought of how far he had come, from the boy mocked by neighbors, to the ambitious merchant, to the man broken by betrayal and grief. Each stage had felt final, as though his suffering had reached its deepest point. Yet each time, life had revealed another layer. And now, sitting under the midnight sky, he realized that peace did not come from avoiding suffering, but from seeing through it. Suffering had been his teacher, leading him step by step to this stillness. As he closed his eyes, Sabal breathed deeply and felt his mind settle. Thoughts still rose, memories, worries, small desires, but they no longer carried him away. They came, they passed, and beneath them he felt the same steady stillness he had discovered with the guru. It was like resting at the bottom of a deep lake, untouched by the ripples above. He smiled faintly, whispering, "I am whole. I am steady." The words were not a wish anymore. They were a truth he could feel. If you've ever had a night where calm settled over you so completely that it felt like the world had paused, you know what Sabal was experiencing. Peace doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives like a soft hum, a gentle weight reminding you that you are safe. If you've had such a night, share in the comments how it felt. Your words may remind someone tonight that peace can be found even after storms. As the hours passed, Sabal drifted between wakefulness and rest, yet his heart remained light. He thought of the Guru's words, that a man gathered within himself is like a powerful machine, no longer wasting energy but focusing it. He wondered if perhaps this was the true wealth he had been searching for all along. Not gold, not reputation, but the ability to rest within himself. The peace of that night lingered into the morning. Sabal woke refreshed, his body restored, his mind clear. In the market, he greeted customers warmly, his calm presence spreading to those around him. People lingered at his stall longer, not only for fruit, but because they felt lighter in his presence. His stillness had become contagious, offering others a moment of quiet in their own restless days. That evening, when he sat again in silence, Sabal realized something even deeper. Peace was not something he had found by chance. It was something he had cultivated, step by step, by gathering himself, by letting go of illusions, by touching the center within. It was not fragile. It did not vanish with each passing wave. It was a seed planted in him, and each breath was watering it. Yet he knew, too, that peace was not an ending. It was a doorway. Beyond this calm, greater understanding waited. The Guru had hinted at truths even deeper, truths about the nature of life itself, and Sabal, though grateful for the stillness he now felt, sensed that his journey was not yet complete. For now, though, he allowed himself to rest. Midnight peace had come, and he embraced it fully, breathing it in with gratitude. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, but tonight he was exactly where he needed to be. Whispers of wisdom. The nights grew softer as Sabal continued his practice. Midnight peace was no longer a rare visitor, but a companion that met him each evening when he sat in silence. The market, with its noise and urgency, still carried the same rhythm, but he no longer felt shaken by it. He was steady, anchored in the center within. And yet, beneath his calm, he sensed that there was more to see, more to understand. It was as though the peace he carried was pointing him towards something deeper. One evening, after closing his stall, Sabal returned to the grove. The Guru sat as always, unmoved, his presence like a mountain. Sabal bowed low and said, "Master, I feel peace now where once I felt only storms. I can see my desires as illusions, my grief as waves, my fears as passing clouds. But still I wonder, what is the truth beyond this? Who am I, truly, when all of it falls away?" The Guru's eyes opened slowly, calm and sharp as starlight. He said, "You are not your wealth. You are not your failures. You are not your grief, your ambition, or your fears. You are not even the thoughts that pass through your mind. You are the awareness that sees them all. You are the stillness beneath the waves, the space in which everything rises and falls. That is who you are." Sabal felt the words settle in his chest like stones sinking into deep water. He had heard many teachings, had lived through many lessons, but this was different. This was not about how to live in the world. It was about who he was beyond the world. He realized then that his whole life had been spent identifying with fragments, coins, titles, possessions, even sorrow. Each one had claimed, "This is you." But none of them had lasted. All had slipped away. Only the awareness that witnessed it all had remained. If you've ever had a moment when you realized you are not your worries, not your achievements, not even the stories you tell yourself, you know the awakening Sabal was touching. That recognition can be freeing, like stepping out of a costume you didn't know you were wearing. If you felt that shift, share it in the comments. Your words may help someone tonight take that same step. The Guru continued, "Most people live divided, believing they are each passing thought, each fleeting desire. They scatter themselves until they are exhausted, never realizing that what they seek has always been within. To awaken is not to become something new, it is to recognize what has always been. You are the awareness, the stillness, the space in which life unfolds." Sabal sat silently, letting the words wash over him. He thought of the years he had spent chasing coins, plotting against rivals, collapsing under grief. Each time he had said, "This is me." But now he saw the illusion. The truth was quieter, simpler, deeper. He was not the waves, he was the water. As he left the grove that night, the world looked different. The market lights flickered in the distance. The air hummed with the sounds of night, but Sabal felt no weight in them. The world would rise and fall, fortunes would come and go, lives would begin and end, but the stillness he had touched would remain. It was not something he had gained, it was something he had uncovered. Walking home under the stars, Sabal whispered to himself, "I am not broken, I am not lacking. I am the space that holds it all." The words were not a mantra to convince himself, they were truth, whispered like wisdom from within. And yet, even as he breathed in this new understanding, he knew his journey was not finished. For wisdom, once whispered, must be lived. And the test of his awakening would not be in silence alone, but in how he carried it into the shifting storms of life. The gentle closing. The days passed quietly after the Guru's final words, and Sabal carried them with him like a lantern in his chest. The marketplace still bustled, children still laughed, rivals still muttered, but he no longer felt entangled in their noise. Each morning he opened his store with steady hands, and each evening he returned home with a calm heart. His life was simple, but within that simplicity was a richness no gold could match. At night, when the world grew silent, he would sit in stillness and listen. Sometimes thoughts rose, sometimes memories tugged, sometimes desires whispered, but he had learned to see them for what they were, passing waves. Beneath them, he always found the same stillness, the same awareness, the same truth. He smiled often in those quiet hours, not because he had found answers to every question, but because he had learned that he did not need them. To be present, to be whole, to be awake, that was enough. He thought of the path that had carried him here. The mockery of neighbors, the burden of debt, the betrayal of friends, the grief of losing his parents, the endless hunger of ambition. Each had seemed unbearable at the time. Each had felt like the end. Yet each one had been a teacher, leading him closer to the truth. Suffering, as the Guru had said, had always been a doorway. It had stripped him down, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the awareness beneath. And there, he had discovered himself. If you've listened this far, perhaps you too have carried storms of your own, loss, fear, ambition, or grief. And perhaps you've wondered, like Sabal, what it all means. Let me remind you, your suffering does not mean you are broken. It may be a teacher, pointing you back to the stillness that has always lived within you. If this story has stirred something in you, share it in the comments. Your words may become part of someone else's journey tonight. As Sabal walked through the streets in the evenings, he sometimes caught whispers of children saying, "That's the man with the quiet smile." He did not need titles. He did not need riches. His presence itself had become his gift. The market had once been a place of battles for him. Now it was simply life unfolding, a place to practice peace, to live awake, to carry the stillness he had uncovered. On his final visit to the grove, he bowed before the Guru and said, "Master, I no longer feel lost. I no longer search outside for what was always within. I am grateful, for you have shown me how to see." The guru's smile was quiet, but his eyes shone with the warmth of approval. "Then live," he said simply. "Live with awareness." That is the teaching Sabal left with no gold, no promises, no power, only a steady heart, and in that he was richer than he had ever been. Now, as this story closes, I invite you to pause. Feel your breath. Notice how it rises and falls. You don't need to chase anything, not tonight. You don't need to solve every question. For now, you can rest in the simple truth that you are here. You are breathing, and within you there is a stillness untouched by the noise of the world. If this journey has brought you peace, take a moment to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you can join me for the next story. Each tale we share together is another lantern on the path. And speaking of the next story, our upcoming video will explore another Zen teaching, a story about a wandering monk who learned the value of letting go when a single cup of tea changed his life. But for now, let the lights dim. Let your breath soften, and let sleep find you gently. You are safe, you are whole, and you can rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.